When you think of Tennessee, you think of Dolly Parton, UT Vols, or Music City. But Tennessee is also home to rich tribal history and Appalachian horror stories. These tales are passed down generations, whether out of fear, gossip, or actual belief. The Bell Witch haunting is one of those legends. But this witch hunt isn't a fable conjured up to keep children in line. While the ghostly rumors can be up for debate, a man's death cannot. Starting in 1817 in Adams, Tennessee, John Bell Sr. and his family came into contact with the spirit of a witch who was able to shapeshift, speak, and hit them. These hauntings would persist until John Bell Sr. died of poisoning. Legend says that even the future President Andrew Jackson had an encounter with the spirit as well. This case blends history with elements of fact and fiction, leaving people wondering what really happened. To help us get a better understanding of the case, Chinedu Amafula of Nashville Public Library Special Divisions Collection has invited us to take a look at some of the earliest written recordings surrounding the Bell Witch. In 1846, Richard Williams Bell wrote about his family's interactions and his father's interactions in a journal entry that he titled Our Family Trouble. This would eventually be put into the authenticated history of the Bell Witch in 1894, written by Martin V. Ingram. Martin was a newspaper editor in Clarksville, Tennessee, and he had befriended the Bells through one of the sons. This was the first publicated documentation of the Bell Witch story. Both books ultimately say the same thing, that the Bells were being haunted by a poltergeist named Kate. Kate's main target was John Bell Sr., along with his daughter Betsy. Neighbors reported seeing things, and a slave even claimed to see a two-headed dog creature while he was on the land. After Kate successfully poisoned and killed John Bell Sr., her attention went to Betsy. She wanted to sabotage her engagement to the neighbor Joshua Gardner. By 1820, John Bell Sr. was murdered. By 1821, Betsy had called off her engagement. She appeared less and less until she ultimately vanished, especially after she had killed the patriarch. Historians look into different reasons why Kate could have been doing that, but one that comes up is that there was a disturbed Native American burial ground on the property. While some of the elements of the Bell Witch story might sound unrealistic, many parts of it are still grounded in reality. My friends and I are heading to Austin Peay University to speak with Dr. Megan Mann about how science could explain the strange goings-on in this centuries-old case. This isn't your first time speaking about the Bell Witch story. Can you kind of tell me how you got drawn into this case?
So I took a job at Austin Peay State University as a chemistry professor. That's what happened. And I took that and just started looking at it kind of how a scientist would, because I'm a scientist, that's what we do. I realized that kind of at the base of the story is a story about toxicology, which is interesting to a person like me who's a toxicologist.
Can you walk us through your perspective, your theory on John Bell Sr.'s final days?
Yeah, so if we assume everything was written at face value, and that they wrote down what they saw, a lot of his symptoms could be explained by a lot of the heavy metals will do that type of poisoning. But there are very few of them that will give you a blue flame and a fire, and there's very few of them that will kill you that fast.
Whether we're debating if a spirit did it or a human did it, you know, John Bell died.
Yes.
Very likely he was poisoned.
Yes.
You have your own speculations on who would have done that to him.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like a list of possible suspects.
Yeah, my gut always says look at the love interest. That's where I go to.
Yeah. John Bell was looked at as being a very good man by his family and friends, but not everybody were his family and friends and had a very different view of him. I think it just kind of depends on who you talk to, and I think the folklore ended up including Kate.
With Kate Batts, do you know much about her life and how she would have ended up in this situation to where she would be labeled a witch?
I have no idea, but I mean, we're talking the 1800s. Mm-hmm. It didn't take a whole lot to be called out as a witch, mm-hmm. right?
Yeah.
I mean, she was just a woman who like had too many herbs in her kitchen. You know, suddenly she's a witch and she's responsible for all these crazy things. So sometimes I think of this as two different cases. I think of this as the haunting, the supposed haunting, right? Where they were hearing this voice and other weird things were happening that are completely unexplainable. And then I think of it as the poisoning that happened to John Bell that killed him, you know, right before Christmas there in 1820. And maybe they're not the same thing, right? Like, maybe they had this weird stuff going on and someone took advantage of that weird stuff to kill someone they didn't like. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility.
Looking through a probable lens about John Bell's final days was very informing, but it does not sit right with me that an innocent woman could have been wrongfully labeled. To gain a better perspective on witchcraft, Malia McCammon, the owner of Inner Perfect's Curiosity Shop in Knoxville, Tennessee, has agreed to speak with me about her experiences with magic and the misconceptions of being a witch. Could you kind of talk to me about what it means to be haunted?
Even that word can have so many different meanings, right? Or the word spirit, or the word entity, or demon, you know, or anything like that. When really kind of working with the history and the lore of the Bell Witch, I would say that witches would not really haunt something, okay? It would be a spirit, an entity, an energy.
Kate Batts was wrongfully labeled a witch, mainly being at the wrong place at the wrong time. If you could talk about throughout history how people, mainly women, have been wrongfully labeled a witch just for being defiant or different.
It was just a nice excuse that it was just like, well, if I say this about this person, then it's going to stir up all this fury and this chaos, and it wasn't related to actual witchcraft at all. For me personally, as a modern day witch, practicing pagan, whatever you want to say, I use that term as like a reclaiming of that word, as trying to give it a sense of positivity. I don't want to say that in like a cliche way, but to say that I'm embracing, kind of reclaiming my own power and kind of the power of anyone who was wronged or, you know, kind of ostracized just because they were different or because they worked closely with the earth.
Our next stop is actually going to the Bell Witch Cave and Cabin. Mm-hmm. You know, these places are known to have been haunted. Do you have any advice on how we could protect ourselves spiritually, if there's something that we could purchase here that would help us?
There are so many tools, which is, you know, what I call them, that you could use. There are protective crystals, there are smudge bundles, sage or Palo Santo. There are protective items like an evil eye, which is not evil, but it wards, you know, protects you against negative energy. There are so many things that you could do, but really kind of having a belief or a connection to that tool is important as well.
As we traveled to our final destination in Adams, Tennessee, we drove across the same roads that Andrew Jackson allegedly did when he was said to encounter the violent spirit. Andrew Jackson was a general when he heard of the stories of the Bell Witch. On his way to see it, his wagon was stuck. Andrew said that it was because of the witch, and the story goes that the spirit responded she would allow his wagon to keep moving and that she'd see him again. And she did that night when Andrew and his men set up camp. A witch hunter was bragging about the witches he had killed, and the spirit showed up and tormented him until he claimed to feel needles on his skin. Andrew Jackson returned to Nashville not long after that. The cave actually comes into play much later, after the original haunting. Betsy and her friends went exploring, and one of her friends got stuck into a hole. There was a voice that said that they would help him out, and then that boy said that he felt someone grab him and pull him. The same voice that said she would rescue them then lectured the group of kids about being daredevils. The cave was actually added to the National Historical Registry in 2008, and many people believe the witch still takes refuge in there. People like to say that there's wisdom in the crowd, but I rarely find that to be true. I feel like there's misinformation in the crowd repeated over and over again loudly. It scares people into submission, and it makes other people feel powerful to join in and project all the hate they have about themselves and the world onto one person or one group, punishing them for things that they've probably done worse. When you do that, you get stories like Kate Batts. You see this throughout history, in the crucifixions, in the beheadings in the medieval time. You see it in the Salem witch trials. Today, there may not be pitchforks, but you have the headlines and the comment sections of the internet and the media. People always love to hate on someone, to have someone to ogle, to villainize, to pray for their downfall. And in this situation, it was Kate. I think it's pretty scary that if enough people deem something to be the truth, it doesn't matter if it is or isn't, it's going to be looked at as reality. I don't think it'll be long until there's a new mob looking for a new witch.